Good morning, everyone, and welcome to another edition of MasterMind Minutes. My name is Gary Occhigrosso. I'm the managing partner for Franchise Growth Solutions, and those of you who've seen this or heard this podcast before, you know you can click on the link and find out all about developing your franchise or growing your franchise through Franchise Growth Solutions. Additionally, we publish an online magazine called FranchiseMoneymaker.com. We invite you to read through it and make comments. MasterMind Minutes, for those of you who are joining us for the very first time, is a very simple concept. It is a podcast, webcast that's designed to give you information in minutes, not hours. Typically, we have one guest, we ask one question and have one dialogue on a topic, and we go from there. And while we realize that might be a bit of a tease, we will always give you contact information, ways to reach out to our guest if you have more questions or would like to follow up on the topic that we discuss on any given program. And today, my guest, and I'm really happy to have him, is a gentleman named Mike Webster. And Mike has a PhD in game theory, and he's practiced franchise law for more than a decade. But now he helps franchisors use the LinkedIn database to recruit new franchisees, and franchise suppliers become preferred vendors, something that's very near and dear to my heart as a supplier. So Michael, first of all, let me thank you for being with us today. You know, this is long overdue. We know each other for a while here. We've had numerous conversations. You know, before we get into the topic, why don't you tell us a little bit more about maybe your background and what you've been doing during the pandemic and what's going on with your company?
Thanks, Gary. You know, Joe Caruso and I have been working together for 10 years on LinkedIn, and the pandemic has just accelerated the franchisor and supplier interest in using both the database and now LinkedIn events. LinkedIn events are what many people are looking to provide them with something, since they can't go to trade shows. and when the trade shows do come back, they're going to be hybrid events, right? There's going to be a part of them that's live, and there's going to be a part of them that's online. And LinkedIn events, a year ago, LinkedIn started with their event platform and technology because they thought the pandemic was going to last 18 months. And they'll probably be right. That'll be about it'll be at least that. So their event technology has really grown, and we're helping a lot of people integrate their pages with events.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and you know, I find the LinkedIn platform right now, and I use it for daily posts and communicating with potential clients. We also use it for lead generation for some of my franchise clients. Now, we don't drop ads into feeds. We do kind of that direct, and you know more about it than I do, where we actually do outreach to potential franchisees that we believe fit our persona of who we believe is an ideal franchisee.
Yeah, the direct outreach is generally what you want to start with. The ads without analytics, you know, unless you have good analytics, you're just going to spend a lot of money on ads because you're competing with the IBMs, you know, the Apples of the world, right? That they're running ads, trying to recruit people. They've got a much bigger budget and sexier story than you do. So you have to be very careful on sponsoring ads. Now, having said that, sponsoring your trade show or sponsoring an event does make a lot of sense because, you know, you're paying for a click-through that right now is there's not a lot of competition. There will be soon, but right now the competition for those click-throughs is low. So that's a good time.
And that's great to know. And I would urge the audience, because we have a different topic, but I would urge the audience that if you're interested in this, Mike, and he mentioned Joe Caruso earlier, I mean, these guys are experts in guiding folks through these endeavors and using LinkedIn in the best possible way. So I would recommend that you contact Mike and talk about that in greater detail. Our topic today is, connected to the industry that Michael and I are both connected to, and that's, in the franchising, but in that section of franchising, particularly restaurants and franchised or otherwise. We can talk around this today, and that is, after this pandemic, and I think we're closer to the end than the beginning. I think we all see the light at the end of the tunnel, so to speak. But there's been so many changes in the restaurant business. Everything from ghost kitchens to third-party ordering platforms and on and on. What of those changes do you believe will remain as, I'll use the word permanent features in the restaurant industry once we get beyond this crisis?
Yeah, that's it's a really fascinating question, isn't it? Right? Because you have to figure out, well, what changes were just pushed upon us, and what changes really were all already there, and they were revealed by the pandemic and the changes we had to do. So, the third party, the ghost kitchens, and sort of contactless payments are really the three things that I see um, being more on the restaurant technologies radar scale. Um, Look at something as boring as what the technology behind contactless payments, right? The NFC technology, near field communication. For years and years and years, the United States, just because of its banking industry, has not jumped on the bandwagon for chip-enabled cards, right?
Mm-hmm.
You just don't see that compared to the rest of the world. Now, with with contactless payment being sort of ingrained in people's minds, right? What will we see? Will we see cards being enabled, or will we see smartphones being used as electronic wallets?
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Mm-hmm. Sure.
What's your thought on that?
Yeah, I guess in a broader sense, not being as technically inclined in these things as I know you are, I would tell you that what I've seen, and I use partially kind of my day-to-day lifestyle as the example, but I'm also observant to other people. And why I say that is because being in the restaurant business, being in the franchise business, obviously I'm aware of these things and I use them because I either advise clients or clients have questions for me. I guess what I would say to that, just in general, because I believe you used the term, kind of propelled us into these things or forced us into these things. What I've seen now is that there was technology that existed. Certainly, things like tap and pay, certainly things like third-party ordering platforms, this Zoom call. I mean, this
Right.
technology existed. Whether there was a reluctance or an ignorance, I don't want to judge. It just seems that the pandemic, in a good way, if we can find anything good about this, actually pushed us 5 years ahead in terms of having to use this technology that many of us either didn't know existed or were reluctant to use. And I see that as an absolutely upside opportunity in many industries. That's what I think of it kind of in a broad way. People my age in their 60s who never would have used, an electronic wallet or never would have used Uber Eats, now they're using it. And I think it's fantastic.
That's interesting. The Zoom call, I mean, well, I'll just go off on a bit of a tangent here is, Joe and I are getting calls from people all over the world that we would have never had the chance to talk to before. Right. I mean, that's, and with the Zoom call, even if the video isn't working, and even if you're trying to speak across languages, like, the guy's third language is English, his first two languages you've never heard of, um, there's a real communication there, enabling of communications that you just would not have gotten 3 or 4 years ago.
Yeah, I I
That's
agree.
that's amazing. Now, what do you think though of the third party? I mean, this brings me back to I am very dubious that delivery, except for specialized menus, is going to be a revenue stream for most restaurants. I think it's going to be a marketing cost, like an LTO or some other discount. Now, I don't think that's a mainstream view, but what do you think about third party delivery?
Well, it's a great question. And Mike, I have to say, what I love about you is the way you now turned this into interviewing me.
Yes.
So,
Yeah, Gary, I did tell you I was a lawyer, right? I did tell you I
yes,
used to be.
you did. You did. So, it's interesting. I agree with you. I think the third party ordering platforms, which were, pre-pandemic, were just for the most part focused on kind of the urban lunch consumer. What do I mean by that? I mean the 23 to 35-year-old office worker who didn't or she didn't want to leave their desk, go online, go to Seamless, go to Grubhub, order it, and magically your food appears. And whether it costs you $5 more or $8 more or whatever, you almost don't care because maybe you still live in mom's basement. I don't know.
Right.
Now, that being said, I think if you look at it, that you were able to market your wares to customers who would not normally walk past your restaurant, there's upside to it. During the pandemic, it's become, to some extent, for many restaurants, it's become a lifeboat. Fine, great, love it, I understand. But when you consider that, and I have some clients who have told me that their pre-pandemic third-party ordering and delivery was 10, 12, 15% of sales, and now it's 70% of sales, and they're paying outrageous fees on that 70% of sales. Obviously, their profitability is impacted. I think the post-pandemic world, certainly myself, and maybe you, and I'd love to know your thoughts on it, I like going to a restaurant. Right. I like the experience. I think that a restaurant is more than just the food. It's the decor, it's the service, it's the music, it's everything going. It's the event, whether it's just to have lunch to get out of the office, or it's an event, a family event, or out with friends. I don't think that cannot be delivered. That experience can't be delivered. So I think there'll be a place, but I don't think it'll be as large a place as it is now. I mean, I'm curious to know how you feel about it.
I agree with both ideas that, well, you actually had three ideas in there. One is that during the pandemic, delivery has been a lifeline, but it's not a profitable lifeline, right? So it can't remain. Two is restaurants are about experience, right? We do not have an internet that delivers smells,
right?
Right. So you can't create that experience online, and so the restaurant experience. But I think the restaurant experience is going to change, right? I think we're going to demand different things out of our restaurants. I don't think we fully understood yet how different the restaurant is going to be, or that experience is going to be when we're ordering with our smartphones.
Yep.
Right?
Yep.
I think that's where, if you're looking at changes, you really have to start with the menu leaves the paper and goes onto the smartphone. And we have not thought through all of how that's going to work. Yep. We know that, yes, we know that probably we're going to change up our mix of servers and expediters, probably have more expediters and less servers. We don't know exactly how that's going to work. We don't know how the menu itself is going to change. Are people going to be able to, pick and choose from what the kitchen actually has? Is that going to be an option?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
No, I'm sorry. I don't, before we go too far down that path, you said some very interesting things that we're experiencing with clients as a result of the delivery component that really has exploded during the pandemic. And there's essentially three components there. Number one is your entire menu cannot necessarily be delivered, nor should it be. So
Right.
we've advised a lot of our restaurant clients, franchise and otherwise, to trim their menu. Get to your kind of, like the Billboard top 20. What's the top 20? And that involves understanding the technology behind your POS system, looking at product mix, understanding where the profitability is. It's more than just saying, well, a lot of people come in here and ask for the XYZ burger. Okay, that's not statistical. That's just, your feel. The second piece is that on the guest side, what franchisors or franchisees and restaurateurs have had to deal with is that on the guest side, they almost want their food delivered to them. I'll use the term ticket time for those of you who are not familiar with the term. Ticket time is typically from the time you order your food to the time you get it. So ticket time, guests are almost expecting ticket times to be the same on a delivery as if they were either in the restaurant or ordering in a pre-pandemic world where there weren't 100 orders ahead of you. And then the third piece that's been the most challenging for my clients, and they're connected, it's actually, there's an A and B piece to this third component, is what is the restaurateur willing, what's the territory they're willing to deliver within, so that the food arrives in a way that it's not cold or mush. And a lot of our clients in the beginning were taking on far too reach, and they were having really irate customers with terrible Yelp reviews. The B portion of that is packaging has to change, and it needs to change. So I look at the length of the menu or the size of the menu, the ticket time, and then what is the condition of the food when it's delivered. That's where I think restaurateurs need to focus.
Yeah, I think all of those, can be summarized up at saying, look, how long did it take Domino's to get delivery right, at scale? And what, it took them like 7 or 8 years, and they were blowing through millions of dollars with IBM. There were, franchisee lawsuits over this in the 80s. For all of, to get all of those answers right, took them a long time, a lot of pain, and they had to produce, an industrial pizza, right? Which not all of us care for.
Right.
But to think that an app could do this in 6 months, I mean, you just don't know any of your history, right? You
Yes.
can't get that. It's just absurd.
Yeah.
And you're hitting on all of the questions that the Domino's franchisees had to ask of themselves and the franchisor in the mid 80s,
Yep.
right? What is the most profitable size of pizza, right? There's a difference between the size of pizza you want to deliver and the size of pizza people will pick up,
Mm-hmm.
right? Especially, if you're in New York and you're competing against people who don't deliver, who, the pie has a different size for pickup. So that's
Yep.
very, very important. The ticket time, right? I mean, these people think, my children think that food, where it doesn't come from a grocery store, it comes from a smartphone. Really?
Right.
Really? Or it comes from dad, right?
Yeah.
Dad, make me something.
Yeah.
But that expectation there is what you're pushing behind that is, when you're in a restaurant, it could be a long and leisurely wait for food, and you would enjoy yourself. Not so much if you think that you're saving time, right, with your phone
Yeah.
ordering. So that, I think that's very important. And the territory and the packaging, that's a really good insight, right? It's very important that the whole packaging, how it looks, if you're delivering anything more than Chinese food or pizza, you have a big problem,
Yep.
right? You have a huge problem.
Yeah.
And you know, the thing that I was looking at, and the people that are going to solve this first are in the, I think, are in the high end restaurants. They're going to go back to, well, wait a minute. You know, there was a time when I was the cook and there were servants and we put on a heck of a meal, right? Why can't we do that now? Why can't we get that right now?
Yeah.
And I think, and those, you know, people who live in luxury homes and have a lot of money right now aren't spending it. So they'll be able best to absorb the high cost of
Yeah.
delivery.
I agree. I agree. I think, and then I have another piece to this that I want to move to, but I think the high end restaurants are most vulnerable to negative reviews for a few reasons. First of all, their food is of a higher quality, so the guest expectation is very different than if I order a fast food hamburger. And also, they are not or have not in the past been focused on packaging because the vast majority of their guest base is an in-dining experience because they want the full, you know, the full Monty, so to speak. So I agree with you 100%. The other thing that, you know, when we look at, you know, what permanent features do we see remaining after the pandemic, and I'm not, by the way, I'm not necessarily in the camp that I think it's going to be as big as it's become or seems to become. And I'm sure you've heard of the term ghost kitchen. And again, to get back to your concept of people like the experience of a restaurant, while I understand the need and the ghost kitchen, the rise of the ghost kitchen, for me, once we are post-pandemic, I see that they will be overbuilt, the demand will decrease, and I wonder what happens to all these ghost kitchens. Maybe they just become ghosts. What are your thoughts?
Well, you know, again, reflecting on history, what did we used to call ghost kitchens? They were commissaries. And
Mm-hmm.
well, we know what a ghost kitchen is. It's nothing new. It's a commissary.
Yeah.
We understand how commissaries work, the pros and cons. Now, just because you have the capital markets pushing ghost kitchens, right? Because Uber Eats can't make any money and never will make any money, in my opinion. They come up with all of these other, you know, add-ons. And the ghost kitchen is just, to me, it's an invention of the capital markets,
Yeah.
right? We know what commissaries are. Yes. If you say to me, okay, well, what are the economics of a commissary? Well, I can tell you, right? I can tell you the pros and cons of it. Has anything in the pandemic changed anything about the economics of commissaries or catering? No, right? So now, having said that, though, I do think that the Franklin Junction people with their host kitchen and what I think of it as sort of menu testing is not a bad idea, right? What they're doing is taking established brands into a market that the brand doesn't have any presence, throwing up that brand's menu and testing it out in the local area, right?
Mm-hmm.
I think there may be something to that, but it's not because a ghost kitchen reduces your cost structure, right? Ghost kitchens are very expensive to run, right? You've got all sorts of different menus. You're reliant on third-party delivery. It's this idea that they're um, less costly. They may be less costly to get into compared to opening your own restaurant, but running the darn things, I mean, you have uncertain demand, right? You're dealing with a bunch of different brands. So
Yeah.
I think that, again, you know, the ghost kitchen phenomenon, like you, I think it's overblown. I think we know what commissaries are, but I would wonder about whether the Franklin Junction people can carry off their host kitchen idea.
Well, I agree. You and I are on the same page about this, I guess. And for those of you just joined us, we're talking to Mike Webster, and we're talking about things that will remain what we are classifying here as permanent features in the restaurant industry after the pandemic. Well, what I would say about the ghost kitchen piece, and you touched on a lot of topics there. One part of it is ghost kitchens, and yes, they're not new, but when they can do something that a restaurant can't do. So you mentioned testing out a menu of a restaurant in an out market without actually building a restaurant. Hey, that's great. That's something that the restaurateur can't do unless he goes and builds a restaurant. So I love that idea. But restaurants now, and I have a friend, a gentleman named Brian Berger, brilliant guy. He's got a concept down on 23rd and Park Avenue called the Sous Vide Kitchen. And it's a virtual food hall. And it started out as a restaurant, and it is a bricks and mortar place. But he started adding different cuisines, but not as menu extensions, as actual brands that lived online that you can order from. And that to me was brilliant, because in that setting, people could come in and order different types of cuisines from this ghost kitchen concept and enjoy it there or have it back at their office. But restaurateurs have learned how to do that. So the idea of purely a ghost kitchen or these co-op kitchens, or I spoke with someone a few weeks ago, we didn't take them on as a client. They actually have a franchised ghost kitchen, and there's 2 or 3 of them. I just wonder, when we all get back to some level of normalcy and restaurateurs are going to be offering different concepts out of their own back of the house, who needs the ghost kitchen franchise and who needs the ghost kitchen per se, because they're not doing something different that a restaurant can't do. That's kind of my take on it.
Well, I think you could push that further. You could say, look, restaurateurs have an advantage because they primarily think of the guest experience. Everything starts from there, right? They don't start with, wow, this is a real cool technology. Or if they do, they don't last very long.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So, I mean, the Sous Vide, that's interesting. So he's developed, your friend has developed or used the sous vide cooking technology and adapted it to various menus. Is that what I'm hearing?
Yeah, absolutely. He's brilliant. He's done this, 2-3 years before the pandemic. And actually, I did an article on him in Forbes a couple of years ago. And the plus factor there is he has set up his restaurant to handle numerous cuisines, but not as if you're walking into, say, a Mexican restaurant and ordering something on the menu that's an Italian cuisine. You go, well, how good could it be? I'm in a Mexican restaurant.
Right. Yeah.
He actually has created various brands. So that's where I think there's some.
Is it like a food market idea?
No,
Okay.
He calls it a virtual food hall. So he had a space that was a restaurant, and that brand still is one of the brands in this. So it's like a food hall, but rather than having the various, little kiosks around the perimeter, kind of like the old mall food courts,
right,
there's actually electronic kiosks. So you pick your restaurant, you pick your food, and then the food is prepared and you can dine in, but a vast majority of his business is takeout and delivery. But it's all restaurants all under one roof, but they don't actually live in the real world. I don't know how to describe it other than
you think that takes over then? Is that a challenger in your view to the current food courts in large downtown buildings?
It is and it isn't. The difference there, if you're talking about, like here in New York, we have urban space.
Right. No, I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about smaller QSR food courts in the large commercial offices.
It could if you're not brand driven, but I believe most people are brand driven. I think if I walked into or ordered fried chicken, let's say from a ghost kitchen or a virtual food hall or something like that, even if it tasted as good as, say, Popeyes, there's something in me that says Popeyes is the brand that I'm the brand lover, and Popeyes can engage me as a customer in a unique way just connected to their brand. Whereas if I'm just someone and I have a lot of these brands or these cuisines, I'm not sure I can engage and connect the customer and create a brand lover, if that makes sense.
Well, let me push back a bit on that. When I go downtown and I go into a food court, there'll be a McDonald's and 10 other brands that you've never heard of. Well, and where's the lineup? Even though people are at lunch, and time stressed, they'll stand in a huge lineup for McDonald's. Echoing your idea that people want to be served by the brand. But suppose those other kitchens there are all replaced by kiosks, right? And there's really just one kitchen behind it serving it.
Well,
If I'm a food,
I'm sorry.
Because some of the some of the people who operate these other brands, they operate like 7 or 8, 10, 15 different brands. And if they can minimize their cooking staff, and by putting in something like these kiosks, I wonder if they'll look at that.
Well, I think you do have. I think you do have some companies that operate that way already. Companies like Aramark and HMS Host, if they're operating, say, in a travel plaza, or where I've seen it in sports arenas, where there's one cooking kitchen, one facility, and they're pushing food out under various brands to different, we'll use the term kiosks, or, little areas where you get food. So I think to some extent it's happening, but it's happening in unique venue.
Yeah,
it's not happening kind of in the public eye, so to speak. Mike, we're really running long here today, but this has been totally fascinating. Any last thought you want to give us on this idea of what changes will remain permanent after the pandemic in the restaurant industry? And then we'll kind of ask you how people can connect with you. But last thoughts?
Yeah, I think the things that when you go through your sort of list of things that are going to be permanent, you have to start with what makes the customer experience better, right? If you start with that and then work back through the ecosystem, you're probably going to come up with the right answer. And you've got to look back, when did this trend start? Don't look back 18 months, look back, 5, 7 years for the trend, and to see what's been accelerated. That way you're going to ignore a lot of the capital market noise.
Yeah, I agree. That's a great last thought for sure. If folks want to know more about this topic, or what you do, or how you can help them recruiting franchisees using LinkedIn's database and suppliers, how can they reach out to you?
Well, the best place to reach out to Joe and I is, of course, on LinkedIn. Just search for franchise-info. And I'd be very surprised if somebody who's listening to this podcast has not been approached by Joe Caruso at least 7 or 8 times in the last 3 years.
Well, we love Joe. We love Joe just for that reason. He always assumes you haven't gotten his last 5 emails.
I know. No, Joe, you can't say no to Joe. You can avoid him for a while, but it's very hard to get off his list. The only way you can do that is move out of LinkedIn or just die, and even if you're dead, I think
I hear you. Well, again, for those of you interested in reaching out, it's franchise-info. Is it .info or info on the LinkedIn platform? It's franchise.
Yeah, I think I better just check this out. I think it's just on the LinkedIn platform. Yeah, it's just franchise-info. There's no dot.
Yeah. See, I see it all the time and engage with it. I'm kind of blind to it. Look, I think the topic here is fascinating because it isn't something that is closed to a specific industry. The restaurant business touches everyone in the country. Everyone interfaces with a restaurant. How restaurants are going to kind of live and thrive and survive, and the things that they keep going forward post-pandemic, I think it'll be interesting to see. I think there are a lot of unanswered questions right now, and that's maybe the fun of it, the beauty of it. We'll see how it unfolds. But Mike, I can't thank you enough for being with us today. It's been fascinating, and I hope to see you in person at some point in the near future.
Thank you very much, Gary. I very much enjoyed this. I appreciate
Great.
it.
Thank you.